Soviet perspective. So it's 1 out of 27 chapters in the book. So, but it's an important chapter indeed. As Mort has mentioned, this quotation from Condoleezza Rice said why the United States doesn't recognize until today the Armenian genocide because of importance of Turkey, because of military bases. Well, if you look at the map, of course, it's 9,000 kilometers away from the United States. But all these bases are just on the border with Russia and formerly Soviet Union. So as much as American politicians tiptoeing around the issue of recognition, actually the Soviet politician did exactly the same, and for the exact same reason. The recognition of Armenian genocide, or dealing with this issue in general, was effectively a geostrategic issue, or as I argue in my book, as a Cold War issue. Again, already been mentioned earlier today, these geopolitical games during the genocide and the role that Russia played in it. Traditionally, Orthodox Armenians perceived Russia as a protector against Muslim Turkey, and so did the image of the Russia project as well. As you know, the RUMP, Armenian Soviet Socialist Republic, was established in December 1920. But due to the cataclysmic events of late 19th and early 20th century, only half of the Armenian population worldwide actually ended up living in Armenia. In 1970s figures, about 2.6 million lived in Armenia proper, and almost nearly as many Armenians lived abroad in the diaspora, mainly in the United States, France, and Middle East. And this issue of diaspora came
Russia is the most biggest.
Yeah, in Russia too, of course. And this issue of diaspora came to play a very significant role in this discourse on genocide, particularly as applied to Armenia in the Soviet Union. Until today, if you like, in the daily conversation, I mean, Turkey and Turks have sort of pejorative meaning in Russian. If somebody is Turk, Turak, it means somebody is not very smart. And historically, I mean, the relation between two countries were very tense. I mean, there were several wars that were waged between them. And in 1918, Russia ceded the provinces of Kars and Ardahan to Turkey, and also gave Turkey full access to the Black Sea Strait that was confirmed in the Montreux Declaration. But then, of course, at the end of the Second World War, Stalin was talking for a position of strength, and they demanded to return all these two provinces, and also they claimed the joint administration of the straits, of the Black Sea Straits, which led eventually to a crisis. Combined with the Greek crisis, it led to the so-called Truman Doctrine of March 1947, which was a significant marker in the Cold War. And in 1952, as some of you know, or may not know, Turkey became a member of the NATO alliance. So the relation between the Soviet Union and Turkey improved only after the death of Stalin, and significantly, let's say, by 1963. It's also around, it so happened that it was in 1963 that the first works on Armenian genocide started appearing in the Soviet Union, written by the, of course, Armenian Soviet scholars. Of course, that was done in the run-up to the 50th anniversary of Armenian genocide. In many respects, I mean, this year, of course, 100th anniversary, right? But in many respects, 50th anniversary was much more significant in 1965, because it was actually for the first time such sort of mass mobilization took place worldwide. And the Soviet Union, as I'm going to tell you, was not an exception. So what is interesting, of course, the perspective that Armenian Soviet scholars took, or were rather obliged to take. So what they did, they held the British and German imperialism accountable, and they decried falsification in Turkish historiography. But the ultimate argument was, of course, politically correct. Namely, that the regeneration of Armenian nation was only possible within the framework of the Soviet Union. For example, John Kirakosyan, who was trained as a historian, but was also a party official in Armenia, he published in 1963 his opus magnum, 512 pages, first in Armenian, was translated into Russian. And that way he argued these things, but review of the book criticized author as well, because Kirakosyan supposedly didn't put enough emphasis on the failure of Armenian nationalists to reach out to Turkish progressive forces. We're talking about the early 20th centuries, and thus indirectly forestalled genocide, if you will. So it was kind of politically correct thesis, really. Well, 24th of April, 1965, Pravda, for the first time ever, published an article about ostensibly Armenian genocide. It was co-written by historian Narcissan and scholar of international law Ushakov. This article exercised themes familiar to the Soviet discourse on genocide. So it said that genocide was endemic to capitalist exploitation and made appearances in Nazi Germany and presently was plaguing the United States, South Africa, South Vietnam, and Portuguese colonies. And the article's conclusion then reflected the growing Soviet confidence in the ultimate victory of socialism. And here I quote, "Imperialism will not be able to implement its darkest designs, even by means of genocide. The future belongs to socialism, to communism." So that's the line. And during the next few years, the Soviet media went even further, promoting the thesis that Armenians, as the first people to ever experience genocide, were able to attain statehood only within the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union, Russia, was actually the great redeemer, in a sense. And now we're moving in 1965, this coming anniversary of Armenian genocide. Along with this article, there was also an article published in Sovietskaya Armenia. And then in the show of solidarity, Armenian students in Moscow planned a demonstration in front of the Turkish embassy. Supposedly they even forced the Turks to lower the flag kind of in the memory of the victims of the genocide. But unsurprisingly, this was not reported in the Soviet press. This information came from New York Times. And the reason was because the 50th anniversary was not publicly commemorated in the Soviet Union, despite the urging of Armenian communist leadership. So on November 13, 1964, that is half a year before, head of Armenian Communist Party, Yakov Zaraban, proposed to the Central Committee in Moscow a series of events marking the mass destruction of Armenians in 1915. But he made his case by enveloping it in a politically correct language. So what he said, well, look, Soviet Russia not only brought the Armenian nation back from the dead, but also propelled it into the communist era. And here he made this issue with the diaspora. So, well, look, there's influential, numerically strong Armenian diaspora, which has been traditionally commemorating genocide on April 24th. And so acting, I mean, again, a quotation, acting on selfish and provocative grounds, the reactionary Dashnak Tutun was now claiming that the mere absence of formal commemoration of genocide in the Soviet Union amounted to denial. That's the point that Zaraban made. And so he proposed kind of to counter this sort of, propaganda coming from a diaspora. And what he proposed was a series of different events. First, preparing propaganda materials that would interpret the 1915 genocide from a Marxist-Leninist position, organizing in Yerevan a closed event with a general theme, the Bolshevik Revolution and the Renaissance of the Armenian people, then erecting an obelisk in memory of the Armenians following the First World War, and then arranging cultural programs in the Armenian diaspora centers. Again, from kind of promoting the achievements that occurred in the Soviet Armenia today. And of course, he added, here is very interesting, none of this should jeopardize the current normalization of Soviet-Turkish relations. So it's kind of self-censorship in place. So what occurs really that then and again the top Armenian communist officials spoke more like representatives of the people than communist functionaries. And that was seen as a problem in Moscow. So the Armenian Communist Party, under pressure, had to consistently renege on both legal and ethnic aspects of mass atrocities. So as of March 1965, the heroism of Armenian nation and its resurrection under communists became the centerpiece of the planned commemoration. And another slogan designated the Soviet Union as a homeland of the Armenians worldwide, again playing on kind of leading towards diaspora. So basically the agenda for April 24, 1965 was scaled down to only include events fitting within the communist dogma. But what happened in Yerevan on 24th of April 1965 was quite unprecedented. Basically the communist authorities misinterpreted or miscalculated the kind of public sentiment with regard to the commemoration of genocide. And what happened, there was about 100,000 people gathered in the main square, just in front of the Yerevan State Academic Theater, where this official event was taking place. And the gathering was spontaneous and featured a handful of slogans. Interesting enough, none of them spelled out genocide specifically, but it was some of the slogans claimed return our lands, that means Eastern Anatolia, but also Nagorno-Karabakh, which was just mentioned. just solution to the Armenian question, and one of them was just said 100,000. They broke into the theater and basically disrupted the meeting, which was again quite unprecedented in the Soviet Union. What was remarkable though, that no criminal charges were laid, no top KGB official lost their job, but the purge within Armenian Communist Party was quite substantial, and Zarubyan as well lost his job in February 1966. So basically it was viewed as a kind of violation of party discipline. But as I said, no criminal charges. I mean, otherwise it would be charges, hooliganism. That was very typical. So nothing of the kind. Also, the people demanded an official recognition of the genocide by the Soviet government and the construction of appropriate memorial to the victims. Well, the first one, when the idea of a memorial for the first time came out, founded from, I think, summer 1965. 3 Armenian academics, including already mentioned Kerakosyan, proposed such a memorial. Interestingly, they also suggested financing the construction through private donations, which again would be quite unprecedented in the Soviet Union. It's very common in the United States and other countries, but not in the Soviet Union, obviously. And of course, after this mass demonstration in 1965, the Soviet government didn't they wanted to basically avert further public ethnic tension, and so the work on memorial began immediately, actually in 1966, and the memorial was ready and unveiled on November 29th, 1967, which was the 47th anniversary of the Soviet Armenia. The memorial, which all of you probably know and have seen, on Nakabert, difficult to pronounce, the hill overlooking Yerevan, but physically separated from the capital city by the river. So it's there and it's not there on our hand. Also, memorial, it didn't feature any ethnic markers. There was no inscription what is dedicated to it. It was built also in kind of architectural tradition of Soviet war memorials, starting popping up in the Soviet Union mid-60s. Volgograd, former Stalingrad, Kursk, Leningrad, all over the place. So it was kind of resembled one of these war memorials, but also the issue of genocide, without any specific inscription, was incorporated in this the issue, amorphous category of fascism. What happened there was related to fascism. That was a very common threat in the Soviet discourse on genocide. And indeed, talking about the normalization of the Soviet-Turkish relations, it was happening in exactly in 1965. Soviet Foreign Minister Gromyko traveled to Ankara, followed by the visit of Prime Minister Süleyman Demirel to Moscow 2 years later, and upon concluding his trip, Demirel published an article where he said that today there is no enmity between Turkey and the Soviet Union. And then there was silence for the next 10 years. Nothing really happened. Also with the memorial was ready, but it was there was a lot of ambiguity involved with it. There was no public holiday. People, if they went, participated in a commemorative ceremony, during the working hours, actually they were fine. So people usually come after working hours. But then it became kind of semi-official. Starting from the 1970s, even party officials participated in this morning procession in the late rites at the memorial. Usually such rites were also brought by other plans or agencies, organizations, usually to the victims of the genocide and the name of who was behind this rite. But as I said, again, no major publications, no other commemorative events until 1975. Again, there is an article in Pravda. It's called Imperialism as Perpetrator of Genocide. And well, this article could be summarized in one rambling sentence. The Armenian nation was only able to survive as part of the Soviet Union, which defeated Nazi Germany and thus stopped genocide. And that was a definitive manifestation of imperialism. So again, kind of way away from what actually happened in 1915. Again, and how they want to monopolize the conversation. And so to stop the tide of anti-Sovietism, Demircan suggested introducing an official day of commemoration accompanied by appearances on TV and the radio. Interesting enough, in his proposition, he was supported by the leader of KGB, Deputy Philippe Bobkov, who anticipated about 300,000 people potentially gathering for the commemoration on 24th of April. Meanwhile, he said he was alarmed by increased nationalist activity inside Armenia and also agitation by Turkey, which argued that the genocide had been provoked by Armenians themselves. Here he also mentioned the Armenian Secret Army for the Liberation of Armenia, the terrorist act. And so he
he suggested accepting the Merchant proposal, which would help to seize the initiative and sort of also to make exercise better control over population. But he was the only one who actually came in support. The rest disagreed. Soviet Prime Minister Nikolai Tikhonov, for example, he was arguing, well, had Turkey installed nuclear missiles on the territory aiming at Soviet Union, that would be a real problem. But now genocide, not real. He said, well, I went back and reread this article that appeared in Pravda in 1975. There was only 5 lines about Armenian genocide. I think that's enough, really. And he said, well, look, there are so many sad anniversaries in Soviet history, starting from Mongol invasion of 13th century till Hatyn in Belarus during the Nazi occupation. We can't possibly commemorate them all, really. And so Gorbachev was also present, and of course next month he would be selected as the Secretary General of the Communist Party. He also went with the majority, and so Politburo considered that according with the class position, the focus of a commemoration should be on present achievements of Armenian people rather than the past trauma. And so it happened, and it's continued like this until the, well, till the very end of Soviet Union's existence. Finally, in I'm going to conclude soon. According to a decision of Supreme Soviet Armenian Soviet Socialist Republic from November 1988, 24th of April was designated as Genocide Remembrance Day. But again, in explicating his decision, the head of the Armenian Communist Party, Suren Arutunian, was still playing by the rules. So this is 1988, already. Perestroika kicked in, right, and glasnost. Referring to intense political situation in Armenia, Nagorno-Karabakh, Arutunian had told Gorbachev that the proletariat was urging the authorities to sanction the commemoration of the genocide. Such authorization would emphasize that the communist state respect the gloomy past of the Armenian nation that had resurrected only thanks to the Bolshevik Revolution. And so, coming to my conclusions, when it comes to commemoration of Armenian genocide, the Armenian communist leadership ended up performing a balancing act between ethnic identity and party discipline. The issue of genocide really came on the wave of ethnic nationalism during Khrushchev thaws, and also reflected the status of Soviet-Turkish relations. The Armenian communist leadership also took a calculated risk by opening the discussion on genocide in an attempt to dampen nationalist sentiments, but in the end this decision had the opposite effect, and in the long run weakened the central authority both in Moscow and Yerevan. Thank you.